Hey guys, we are starting a brand new section of the relationship series. This one is called Self-Image versus God's Image. So far in this series on relationships, we've talked about who is God in our relationship with God, that focusing on our relationship with God. Then we talked about parents and what it looks like to have a healthy relationship with our parents. And so now over the next 4 weeks, with a break for Easter, we're going to take Easter off. We're going to be really looking at how we see ourselves, our relationship with ourselves. I recently was watching a sermon and I was reminded of the A.W. Tozer quote that says, I'm butchering it, but this is kind of a paraphrase, that how we see Jesus determines everything. Because if we get Jesus wrong, then we're going to see ourselves wrong. And so it's a little bit more nuanced from the first 4 weeks. We're not just focusing on our relationship with Jesus, but what does Jesus look like and how are we supposed to be in relationship with ourselves? And really focusing on this idea of self-image. So over the next 4 weeks, I would encourage you, be prepared for you personally to get vulnerable. You get to set the standard for how deep the conversation goes. And I really do believe, it doesn't matter, middle school, high school, guys, girls, the more vulnerable you are as leaders, the more it will encourage and invite your students to also be vulnerable. Also, as a word of caution, we're going to be talking about self-image. Some people are going to feel like, hey, I'm good. I don't have any issues with that. That's not true. We all have issues with self-image. Every single one of us. It's how sin has impacted the world, is that we don't see ourselves properly and correctly. And so sometimes we handle that insecurity different ways. Sometimes we try to mask it with being uber masculine or uber confident. Oh yeah, I don't have any issues. Or we go the opposite route and like, man, all the world is despair. We're constantly anxious. We're never going to be good enough. We're never going to measure up. So in that, just keep your eyes out for students who may say things about themselves, as well as students pointing out flaws in others. We want to encourage students to be self-examining and going, this is my flaw, not for them to look across the circle or look across the table and go, well, that's your flaw. If you have any of that, shut that down immediately. Go ahead, stop. We're not talking about that. That's not kind, that's not loving. And if you and I need to have a conversation, we'll do that. But we're not going to let students call out one another. They can reveal who they are personally, but they can't call each other out. So before we dive into the lesson, just real quick, today, I say today because I'm shooting this on Thursday. Right after the lesson today, we have our leaders hangout, and I would love for you to stick around. We'll have food, we'll have some fun, and just as an opportunity to encourage one another. That is this Sunday. And then next Sunday, we'll have a church-wide baptism. We'll still have life groups, but we have Jack Ray is going to be getting baptized. And so we'll all be going over to watch him be baptized. And then lastly, on Easter Sunday, the following week, April 4th, we are not meeting. Instead, we are going to be encouraging our students to go to service with their families, but also to serve. And so you'll notice that I will probably be having someone come around with an iPad asking students if they would like to fill in and serve in some capacity over Easter weekend. So just giving you that heads up. All right, with that, week number 1, what I see when I look in the mirror. Ultimately, the ultimate goal is to understand that we are the creators created, a truth that changes everything. If we see Jesus properly, we'll better see ourselves. We're going to be diving into Psalm 139. Psalm 139 is all about how does God see us and who we really are. Think about when you look in a mirror, and it's going to use this imagery a lot, looking in a mirror. When you look in a mirror, what do you look for? Some people, specifically more self-absorbed people, maybe they look in the mirror to be like, man, I look good, what looks good about me? But the majority of us, when we look in mirrors, why do we look in mirrors? We look in mirrors, as one young man put it, to find the ugly. Exactly. Why else would a 14-year-old boy check out his reflection in the back of every car as he's walking into a store, right? He wants to make sure his hair is just right, or wants to check, and do I have anything in my teeth, right? Yeah. So why do we look in mirrors? And ultimately, the reason we look in mirrors is to see if we can find flaws. We're trained because of sin, we are trained to see whatever flaw we can find. We look for the flaw. We don't look for, man, what is good, what is right, what is holy, what is put together, but what is messed up. And it puts us in this frame of mind where we're always constantly just trying to fix ourselves. Now that has a greater impact spiritually, right? Because if all we're ever doing is looking at ourselves to try to figure out what is wrong, what do we need to fix, that's not looking at Jesus. That's not looking up. That's not looking, going, man, how do you see me? How did you make me? What do you think of me? It's what do I think of me? What do I need to fix? And that can work itself into a place where, man, I don't ever see God. I don't see God's marvelous handiwork. I only ever see the mistakes inside of me. I get caught up in me trying to fix my own mistakes. And as I try to fix my own mistakes, you know and I know, I'm not strong enough to do all that. And it's only going to lead to despair, destruction, anxiety, and ultimately, I'm going to have a very low self-image of myself. So that's kind of framing the entire conversation. That's where we're coming from. We are trained, the world trains us to look inward, look in the mirror, find the flaws, and always be constantly trying to fix the flaws. Jesus has a different idea, and that's what Psalm 39 is all about. Under the very bottom in the teacher prep, under the Going Deeper challenge, I've encouraged you, reach out to parents, email parents, text parents. We do have, you'll notice in the Planning Center, we have updated sheets. I would encourage you, use those sheets, reach out to your parents and challenge them to do this what you can't see challenge. And what it is asking them to write a note to their child and hang it up in their room or on their mirror. And in it, mention the things that they see that they think are amazing about their child. That maybe their child doesn't necessarily see for themselves. I think this would be incredible. I think this helps bridge the gap between parents and students, and this is an easy win for parents to invest in their students. So I would encourage you to challenge them on that. Okay, so as far as the very beginning, opening up, the opening activity is about having students draw a picture. You can do this. I'm gonna go ahead and say 9th and 10th grade boys. Probably not the greatest opener, but think about it. You are welcome to try this opener where you have the students draw a self-portrait of themselves, or you can just have a conversation on, when you look in a mirror, what are you looking for? What do you want to see? But one of the key questions in this opening illustration is, when God looks at you, what do you want him to see? It's not just what do we think we see, but what do we want God to see when he looks at us? And so in this, we're gonna notice under the ask question, it says, why do we tend to notice our flaws so easily? In this, we're looking for that conversation about how has sin impacted our world. Another question is, why do we also sometimes notice, comment on, or make fun of other people's flaws? Bringing up we see the flaws in our own life, and rather than just fixing our flaws, we want to justify our flaws. And if we can make someone else look worse, it makes us feel better about ourselves. So kind of have that short conversation, then dive right into the lesson. I would encourage you to break up Psalm 139, break it up, read a section, discuss a little bit, read a section, discuss a little bit. But the three big ideas are super key. First big idea is that God knows you. God knows exactly who you are. And in verse 1, it shows us that God knows everything about us. I'd encourage you to just pause on this idea, that God knows everything about us, that he knows our thoughts, he knows what we're gonna do, he knows everything about us. And the question is that encouraging or intimidating? Because if we're walking in righteousness, man, that's encouraging, man. God knows me. He knows everything about me. Man, that's awesome. I'm fully known and still fully loved. But if we're not walking in righteousness, if we're walking in sin, man, the fact that God knows everything about me, that's kind of scary. He knows the things I haven't even told him about, right? But have that conversation, the fact that God knows us, and that's a good thing that God knows us. God knows who we are. He knows our sin. He knows our mistake. And yet he still sent his son to die for us. And he made us. The reason that he knows us is because he made us, which kind of leads us into the second big idea, that God made you marvelous. And here's where I would encourage you to kind of think through having the conversation, because some students will push back against this. I'm not marvelous, right? I've got all these flaws. You might need to bring up the idea about how when sin entered the world, it changed everything. Adam and Eve were made marvelous, they were made perfect, they were made good. But when sin entered the world, though we are still made marvelous, sin has perverted that, right? It's perverted what is going on. And so here's an opportunity for you personally to be vulnerable, to kind of share out of your own life about what was something that maybe you struggled with to see yourself, some place that you struggle with self-image. And ultimately, though, the victory is when you began seeing yourself as God sees you. How did you find, man, I really am made marvelous? This thing that I always thought, man, I really don't like this about myself. God did that on purpose, and it's a good thing. Specifically verses 13 through 16, the fact that we're wonderfully complex. What does that mean? But the fact that God made us marvelous, even though sin has kind of perverted that, changed that a little bit, that is ultimately what's true. And then finally, the last big idea is that God is always with you. Looking at verses 17 through 24, why do you think the psalmist makes this shift, especially in verses 19 through 22? Why does it focus so much on the fact that God is now with us? Not just that he knows us, but he's actually with us. And here's where you can point out that God chooses to be close to us. In many situations, we don't want to be close to God because our sin separates us, our shame separates us, our anxiety separates us. We don't want to be close to God when we have that in our life. And yet, God chooses to come be near us. He wants to be with us. And, how does that change the way that we see ourselves? And so as you're wrapping up the lesson, as you're moving kind of into the application, their idea for an application, I don't know if their questions are really that great. I don't know if those will generate good conversation. But I do like under there, say something like, it says, anytime you see the word I, me, or my in Psalm 139, circle it, write your name over it. That I think might be a little bit more helpful. Is to maybe even just read a verse, how wonderful are your thoughts towards me, right? How wonderful are God's thoughts towards Stephen? And to maybe reread verses 13 through 16 and have them insert their names into that. But specifically, I'd say that the challenge here is that you're going to have to challenge them to do this thing called meditation. I don't mean Buddhist meditation, pinch your fingers together, close your eyes and hum. But to meditate on God's truth. Because at the end of the day, the problem is a heart issue, but it starts with our head. Our heads are trained to see ourselves incorrectly. So how do we change this? We have to begin thinking about something that is different than the way we're currently thinking. And the best way I know to do that is to meditate on Scripture. If you want a passage of Scripture, it's not in the text, but in Mark 10, 13 through 16, I'll put this in the email as well. There's a story of Jesus and the little children, how the little children were pushed away by the rest of society. They said, stay away from Jesus. You're not worthy. Go away. We don't have time for you. Many times our self-image causes us to feel that way. People don't have time for us. We're not wanted. We're unworthy. And yet Jesus says, stop. Let the little children come to me. And it says then in verse 16 that he welcomed them and he blessed them. You get to see the heart of Jesus for these unwanted, despised, rejected, pushed aside, pushed down children. Jesus says, I want them. I want them. I want them to be close to me. I want to bless them. And as we meditate on that, and we put ourselves in the place of little children, that's who Jesus is to us. Even if the rest of the world says, man, I don't want you, go away, pushes us away, you're funny looking, you have a big nose, whatever it may be. Jesus says, no, come to me. Don't stop them. Come to me. I want them. I want to love them. I want to bless them. And as we meditate on that truth, we begin thinking, what does Jesus think about me? And as I meditate on that truth, then I'm able to come to the conclusion that Jesus thinks that about me, and I want to follow Jesus, then it's important for me to think the same thing about myself. I'm not saying that we're perfect, but as I begin to see myself the way Jesus sees me, it changes my self-image and it changes my perspective. That's how I would encourage you. It doesn't matter, middle school, high school, guys, girls, teaching this idea of meditation. And maybe you want to have them meditate on Mark 10:13. Maybe you want to have them meditate on Psalm 139, or maybe you want to say, hey, here's the take-home challenge. Find a passage of Scripture, find one verse that's something about what Jesus thinks about you. Memorize it, save it, put it on your phone. I'm recording on my phone, I was looking for it. Put it on your phone, so every time you unlock it, you read that verse that causes you to think, this is what Jesus thinks of me. What do I need to think of me? And as we do that, we'll begin to see ourselves like Jesus sees us. I hope you guys have fun preparing and have fun with the lesson, and I will see you guys on Sunday.